Hey, what's happening, friend? Big Dog Ethan here, coming at you from a recording being broadcasted on WMTS 88.3 FM in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. And this is none other than the Unnatural State of Affairs, where for the first hour we'll talk politics, and the second hour we will bop our head to some amazing tunes to forget about the depressing commentary that I just gave. So, first off, I'm going to give an intro for viewers on the Kennel, because this is going to be the first time that this show will be uploaded onto my podcast, The Kennel, which you can find at thekennel.substack.com. So I'll be going over that, just doing some housekeeping. And after that's over, then I'll get into my usual updates on the potential genocide that is occurring in Gaza as we speak. As always, nothing pretty is going to be said there in that segment because it's mostly bad news. And then I'm also going to perform an autopsy on the presidential primary candidates in the Democratic Party because for the most part, their campaigns are done. Officially, they're still going. They're still going to head into the South Carolina and Nevada, the Nevada caucus and the South Carolina primaries, but they do not have a chance, as the New Hampshire primaries for sure demonstrated to people. So without any further ado, let's get into some housekeeping here. For those who are seeing the Unnatural State of Affairs for the first time on the Kennel, hi there, welcome. The Unnatural State of Affairs is a 2-hour show that's recorded here at the Kennel and then it's broadcasted live on WMTS Thursdays from 8 to 10 a.m. In the first hour, I provide some fiery news commentary on our depressing updates in the political realm, especially with regards to U.S. politics. And then the second hour, I just provide some eclectic tunes for us to bop our heads to and pretend like the world isn't on fire as we speak. Now, that's not a clean time frame. It'll vary from show to show depending on how much there is to talk about, but you can expect the broadcast to go from 8 to 10 a.m. every time. You know, it's funny. I actually started doing this show in October of 2023. I've done about 7 shows so far, 8 if you count the last one that I did last week. And without fail, almost every time at some point during those shows, I would say something like, and if you had to tune out during the live show, you know, you can find a recording of the talk show segments on my podcast. I swear I'll be uploading them this time. And then I never did. So, there were a variety of reasons why I never got around to uploading those. Some were tech related. Some of them were related to station policies. Long story short, I decided that it would be best if I just waited till the start of the next semester to sort out all the behind the scenes issues. Now, I should note that the broadcasted version and podcast version will be different in a couple of ways. Due to the obvious copyright issues, I will not be uploading recordings of like the DJing portion, the music portion. You'll have to tune into those on WMTS 88.3 FM at around 9 a.m. on Thursdays if you do want to listen to those. I'll put a link in the description where you can tune in if you don't live in Murfreesboro and don't have access to a radio. And also, because of longstanding FCC regulations, the broadcasted version will be censored if I start cursing on here or, I don't know, I accidentally make a call to action of some kind. You're just going to hear like random little cuts or bleeps because FCC, gotta listen to Daddy FCC. So again, to clarify, the broadcasted version will have a full DJing portion and the legally mandated censorship, while the Kennel version will contain an uncensored version of the news commentary segments. All right, house cleaned, I think. Let's get on to the depressing developments of U.S. politics. So as always, I'm going to start off this show with updates on Israel's plausible genocide of Palestinians. We have a lot of new developments regarding the ongoing atrocities in Gaza. I'm going to go over the new casualty numbers from the Euromed Human Rights Monitor, the recent ruling from the International Court of Justice. Also look at the State Department's effective response to that ruling. And finally, then I'll give you some information about a direct action that will be taking place in Nashville this Saturday. But first, because I'm commenting on this issue for the first time on the Kennel, I need to make a couple of important notes before engaging with the meat of this issue. Now, I know for people who've been listening since I started broadcasting this show that you've already heard me say these notes plenty of times before, and I'm sure you are fully aware of these important notes, but for better or for worse, the internet is a permanent place. And considering that we've been seeing pro-Palestinian college students harassed and ridiculed for their valid concerns about the events in Gaza, I need to make this point abundantly clear in case anyone in the near or distant future tries to make false accusations towards me. So, first point. Number one, the October 7th attacks were atrocious. Full stop. According to the Human Rights Watch group, Action on Armed Violence. Sorry, I needed to pull that up. According to what's it called again? Action on Armed Violence is the name of this group. According to them, out of 1,269 total deaths on October 7th, 816 of them were civilians. That is a 64.3% civilian death rate. The leaders of Hamas and really anyone involved in the planning of those attacks should absolutely be tried for war crimes in the International Court of Justice. It is illegal under international law to target any civilians. Now, initially, I thought the leaders and orchestrators of the attacks were living in Qatar, which, if that were the case, that would certainly make it very easy for the state of Israel to go after those leaders, potentially make some kind of deal with Qatar to bring them to justice, or even, send their own troops in to capture them and bring them to justice. But that was true until mid-December of 2023, that all these leaders were living in Qatar. The Jewish Chronicle reported on December 16th, 2023, that, quote, several Hamas leaders recently left Qatar together with their entourages, cutting off communications, including cell phones. The leaders left for Algeria, Lebanon, Iran, and other countries, according to sources cited by Khan News' Arabic channel. Now, as to how Israel should bring them to justice, it is not so clear to me. At this point, I wouldn't have a problem if Israel decided to engage in very minimal military actions to capture said leaders. And when I say minimal, that means like under 10% civilian death rate at the absolute most. For the sake of upholding international law and bringing mass murderers to justice, Hamas must be tried for war crimes. Now, why do I feel it's necessary to make such a simple and obvious point abundantly clear? Pro-Palestinian college students are facing threats for, unbelievably, speaking out against genocide. Most recently, a January 22nd article from The Intercept reported that, quote, during a rally on Friday, according to attendees, 2 individuals sprayed a hazardous chemical that released an odious smell. Dozens of students have reported an array of symptoms such as burning eyes, nausea, headaches, abdominal and chest pain, and vomiting. The campus chapter of Students for Justice in Palestine publicized the incident on Saturday morning, identifying the substance as, quote-unquote, skunk, a chemical weapon used by the Israel Defense Forces against Palestinians, and one that U.S. police departments have reportedly acquired in the past. Shocker. SJB also alleged that the assailants have ties to the Israel Defense Forces, a claim that The Intercept could not independently confirm, unquote. Less recently, an October 12, 2023 Harvard Crimson article reported that, quote, a billboard truck drove through the streets surrounding Harvard's campus Wednesday, October 11th, and Thursday, October 12th, digitally displaying the names and faces of students allegedly affiliated with student groups that signed onto a controversial statement on Hamas's attack on Israel. Further down, it says, quote, on Wednesday, in the face, oh my gosh, quote, on Wednesday, in the face of student safety concerns, some of the statement's harshest critics denounced acts of violence or intimidation against the members of the statement's signatories. Harvard Executive Vice President Meredith L. Wienick also moved to criticize online intimidation and harassment in a Wednesday evening email to university affiliates following this article's initial publication. The responses followed the appearance of the billboard truck, which labeled the displayed Harvard students as quote-unquote anti-Semites. The display also referenced a website that listed multiple full names of students associated with organizations that had signed on to the PSC's statement. That's Palestine Solidarity Committee is what PSC stands for. Quote, the truck returned to the streets surrounding campus on Thursday morning, drawing jeers from some passers-by. The stunt was sponsored by Accuracy in Media, a conservative media advocacy group, unquote. Side note here, for those who may have read Manufacturing Consent, you would understand that Accuracy in Media has been around a long time to advocate for conservative ideas. Specifically, Edward S. Herman and Noam Chomsky examine Accuracy in Media's big report that basically popularized this myth that it was the media who lost the Vietnam War, not the fact that we shouldn't have been there in the first place, because really South Vietnam, nor obviously North Vietnam, did not want us there. And of course, too, it was also just absolutely horrific that we ravaged both the occupying land we were on, South Vietnam. We ravaged their land too, which went widely unreported. And of course, we absolutely tore up North Vietnam as well. That's a bit of a ramble, but my point is Accuracy in Media, it is blatantly a conservative advocacy group is what it is. Very, very much slanted towards conservative ideology. Anyways, I mentioned all of this, what's going on college campuses, to bring up my second point. Pro-Palestinian students are wrongfully being smeared as anti-Semitic and supportive of Hamas. So I want to make it abundantly clear. I do not hate Jews, and I do not support Hamas. I'm going to share a clip here of a virtual panel that the Honors College hosted on October 19th. MTSU Associate History Professor Dr. Ashley Valenzola, who actually specializes in studies of the Holocaust, she is going to explain the difference between anti-Zionism, anti-Israeli sentiment, and anti-Semitism.
My few minutes left here for the opening remarks. The one thing I wanted to bring up is relative to the discourse circulating. There's often a conflation of anti-Israeli, anti-Zionist, and anti-Semitic discourse. And what I mean by that, without having to go into a full history of what each of those means, is that anti-Zionism, which Zionism itself, right, is the ideology and the need for an independent Jewish state, right? Theodor Herzl, the founder of political Zionism, we are a people, one people. And this is within the context, he said, there's vulnerability for Jews living in the diaspora. So it's anti-Zionism is against the idea of an independent Jewish state. Anti-Israeli sentiment is criticism of the state of Israel, its government, its actions, right? its treatment of Palestinians, right? That's anti-Israeli sentiment. And what you often sometimes see is those conflated with anti-Semitism, which is prejudice against Jews in all of its ancient and modern forms. Right? It's wielded to harm Jews, to discriminate against them, and to harm them, to socially isolate them in a variety of different ways. And it's often then where you have Jews living in the diaspora blamed or confronted or challenged by people who are unhappy with Israel's policy. They personally have nothing to do with it. So you see this often coming up. It's one of the things, and I hear some students say the most is, so distance from the conflict. Why are people asking me about what's all the harms and what's going on relative to the Israeli state? And it's this conflation of the three that I wanted to bring to your attention in my time.
I share Dr. Valenzuela's comments here because I want to make it absolutely clear. I harbor no hatred for Jewish people. I absolutely condemn anti-Semitism. It is disgusting to discriminate against anyone because of their religion. And on top of that, anti-Semitism, of course, is kind of the belief that really motivated atrocities like the Holocaust. So I do not harbor any form of anti-Semitism whatsoever. What I do harbor is anti-Israeli sentiment and anti-Zionism sentiment. That first one, anti-Israeli sentiment, that should be understandable to anyone if they listen to what Dr. Valenzuela had to say there. It is reasonable for anyone to make valid critiques of another nation. Conflating anti-Semitism with anti-Israeli sentiment is essentially the same logic as conflating criticism of the Taliban or Saudi Arabia with Islamophobia. You can critique a nation for its actions without harboring hatred for its official religion. Now, the second one, my support for anti-Zionism, that may sound less understandable, so I'll dive into that for a second. Dr. Valenzuela says that, quote, anti-Zionism is against the idea of an independent Jewish state, unquote. At a glance, that may sound bad. What's the problem with an independent Jewish state? The combination of the words Jewish and state is where the problem with Zionism lies. Here's a blurb from a June 11th, 2021 Brookings Institute article. Quote, advocating for Israel specifically as a Jewish state directly and indirectly conflicts with the notion that states should represent and treat all their citizens equally, which is at the heart of democracy, an issue that Biden has made central for his administration and its foreign policy. First, there is the obvious issue of a citizen's sense of belonging to a state defined in terms that exclude them. More centrally, this formulation privileges Jewishness, even of non-citizens, over citizenship of non-Jews in some important ways. For example, a Jew who is a non-citizen with no relatives in Israel and no direct connection to the state or to the land has the automatic right to citizenship and to assets bestowed by the state to go along with it, while a relative, even a spouse, of a non-Jewish citizen of Israel does not have a similar right, unquote. That's the problem with Zionism. It inherently supports the idea of what this article calls an ethno-nationalist state. If it's true that I, and I'd assume that you, the listener, too, fully support the principles of democracy and the separation of religion from the state, then this idea of a Jewish state would seem abhorrent. How on earth is it fair or right for a nation to grant privileges to certain people solely because of their religion? Here's a hypothetical scenario. What if one day Congress passes a bill and the president signs it into law which says, if you're a Buddhist, you get your health care totally covered by the federal government, and you automatically get your own 2-story house of your choosing. How do you think that's going to go over? Personally, and this is just me, I would imagine that there would be some lawsuits immediately being set up. And those people who file those lawsuits, they'd be absolutely correct to do so. So because I believe in democracy and equal rights for all human beings, I am anti-Zionist. But I sure as hell am not anti-Semitic. Despite what mindless pundits would say at any form of criticism towards the state of Israel, and especially criticism of their documented war crimes. So for anyone who tries to say that I either support Hamas or that I am anti-Semitic, you would be wrong. Now, with that made abundantly clear, I'm going to turn our attention now to the latest casualty reports that have come from the Euromed Human Rights Monitor on January 25th. Out of 33,360 people killed, 30,571 of them were civilians. That is a 91.6% civilian death rate. For reference, the Iraq Body Count Project estimates a 70.1% civilian death rate from the Iraq War, at most. And according to stats from Brown University's Cost of War project, civilian deaths in the Afghanistan war, they accounted for 28.8% of all deaths. Those last two wars, they were notorious for the amount of civilian deaths that they brought to those nations. And again, so far, the attacks in Gaza have resulted in a 91.6% civilian death rate. On top of that, we also have 64,150 injured. We have 117 journalists killed. 2 million people have been displaced. 2 million. And according to the CIA World Factbook, Gaza has an estimated population of 2.1 million civilians. So, 95.2% of Gaza's entire population has been displaced as a direct result of Israel's indiscriminate bombing. By the way, that word indiscriminate, that's not me saying that. That was Biden describing Israel's attacks. Indiscriminate. There's a lot more on this infographic from the Euromed Human Rights Monitor, so I will link it in the description of the podcast if you want to examine that more. Now, last week, I examined South Africa's legal case accusing Israel of committing genocide. The International Court of Justice held preliminary hearings about a couple of weeks ago, which were intended to simply determine if it is plausible that Israel is committing a genocide. Last Friday, according to Al Jazeera, the ICJ ruled that it is plausible that Israel is committing a genocide. They issued 6 provisional measures towards Israel, namely that, quote, Israel must take all steps within its power to prevent the commission of acts within the scope of Article 2 of the 1948 Genocide Convention. Israel must also prevent its troops from committing genocidal acts, prevent incitement to commit genocide, allow more humanitarian aid into Gaza, and take effective measures to ensure the preservation of evidence related to allegations under the Genocide Convention. The ruling also called for Israel to report to the court in 1 month on its steps to implement the measures. Now, it is important to note that the ICJ did not call for a ceasefire. Kyle Kulinski, host of my favorite podcast, Secular Talk, speculates that this reluctance stems from the ICJ's inability to enforce a ceasefire. Another Al Jazeera article even notes that the ICJ ordered Russia to halt its war in Ukraine in March of 2022. Well, obviously that didn't happen. The ICJ lacks enforcement powers, and that's probably why they didn't call for a ceasefire. Now, nonetheless, the Al Jazeera article also reports that quote, the government of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will likely be under greater scrutiny than ever over the actions of its soldiers in Gaza and the statements of its leaders and generals, unquote. And even then, this legal battle is far from over. As I've said already, Israeli representatives will have to report back to the ICJ next month to show that Israel is abiding by the court's provisions. We'll see if they can actually demonstrate that, but based on what we've been seeing so far, I highly doubt that. Matter of fact, these doubts are already being confirmed. Euromed Human Rights Monitor reported on Monday that 48 hours after the ICJ issued its provisional measures, quote, the Israeli army has killed over 373 Palestinians, including 345 civilians, and injured over 643 more since the court's ruling. And it's not like the U.S. State Department gives a damn about the measures either. Here is a clip of the Intercept's D.C. bureau chief and co-host of the Counterpoints podcast, Ryan Grimm. Yes, that's the same guy I referenced at during the intro of this show. Here's a clip of him grilling State Department spokesperson Vedant Patel the day before the ICJ issued its measures. There we go.
Okay, I'll come back to you. Ryan, you've hit your hand up. Go ahead.
Sure. I want to go back to the ICJ question.
Yeah.
Setting aside opining on how the preliminary verdict might come out, would the U.S. at least commit to not vetoing enforcement of whatever the court rules, one way or the other?
I'm not going to commit to any action from up here. That's
but to
not
pick up on Matt's question from earlier, doesn't that undermine the U.S. insistence that other countries ought to follow these court rulings? What does it leave of the kind of rules-based order if countries can pick and choose decisions?
That's certainly not what I was indicating. Again, I think we need to take a step back here because a decision has not come down, and no one here knows, unless you can tell the future, what exactly that will be. I'm not going to commit any U.S. government action from up here within the auspices of any body. What I can say is that we believe that the allegations that started this process, that Israel is committing genocide, we believe those to be unfounded. Simultaneously, though, we'll continue to raise with our Israeli partners the moral and strategic imperative that they need to take additional steps to minimize deaths on civilians. But I'm not going to get into this process beyond that.
Last one. At the same time, there were images this week of Israeli protesters blocking aid coming in to Gaza. To get that far into a military zone, there must be some kind of coordination with the military there. Did the U.S. raise with its Israeli partners this question of Israeli civilians protesting and blocking aid getting into Gaza?
I'm not aware of the specifics of those imageries, but what I will just say broadly, both as it relates to Rafah or Kerem Shalom, these are not crossings that the United States, they're not our crossings, but we continue to be in close coordination with the government of Israel, with the government of Egypt, and other interlocutors on the appropriate entry of humanitarian aid, as well as the safe departure of nationals who have a desire to leave Gaza. I've no doubt that had anything sort of propped up that made that delivery more laborious or more time intensive, that we are having those conversations directly, but I just don't have the specifics around that specific situation.
Yeah, for those listening live, you are missing out on visually seeing a State Department hack squirming in front of the press. It's quite fascinating to behold. Not really. I'm sure everyone's probably seen, spin doctors for different federal institutions absolutely squirm before the press, but it's still quite shocking to see that, given the gravity of what this guy is having to comment on. It's the same propaganda line we've all been hearing. We're wagging our finger real hard at Israel whenever they kill civilians, and we're going to keep wagging our finger real hard. We're going to keep wagging like this. Yeah, see this? We're going to be doing this. We're going to be doing this. We're going to be wagging real hard in front of their faces. You'd have to be super indoctrinated to believe anything that is coming out of that guy's mouth. And to further back that up, here is a report from the Associated Press on December 29th, 2023. Quote, for the second time this month, December, the Biden administration is bypassing Congress to approve an emergency weapons sale to Israel as Israel continues to prosecute its war against Hamas in Gaza under increasing international criticism. The State Department said Friday that Secretary of State Antony Blinken had told Congress that he had made a second emergency determination covering a $147.5 million sale for equipment, including fuses, chargers, and primers that is needed to make the 155 millimeter shells that Israel has already purchased function. Yeah. The Biden administration is wagging its finger real hard at Israel, sending them additional aid on top of the billions of dollars we already send them on an annual basis as they engage in potentially genocidal acts and as its leaders clearly express genocidal intent. And of course, what does the State Department do right after the ICJ determines that it's plausible that Israel is committing a genocide? Well, this is from NBC News last Saturday. Quote, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees in the Near East said Friday that Israeli authorities provided information that several of its employees were involved in the October 7th attacks. The allegations were made against 12 employees, according to the U.S. State Department. Of the 12, 9 were terminated, 1 is confirmed dead, and the identity of 2 is being clarified, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said in a statement Sunday, unquote. Now, how many employees does the UNRWA actually have? Well, according to Al Jazeera last Sunday, nearly 13,000. Right there. You see that? They have nearly 13,000 employees. So 12 out of 13,000 employees were allegedly involved in the October 7th attacks. And according to a Time magazine article on Monday, those employees were promptly fired. And I think it even said that, yes, it also said that in the NBC News article as well. So they were all already fired. Perhaps it's surprising that there were even 12 employees, maybe not considering the size of Gaza. I think that is up for debate as to whether or not that's even surprising. But given the microscopic size of this group, again, 12 out of 13,000 employees, that is nothing to panic about if you have 12 employees out of 13,000 who were involved in the October 7th attacks. That is nothing to panic about. At least that's something that a sane and rational person would conclude. But as we all know, no such person can be found in the State Department. This is from Axios last Saturday. On the same day as the ICJ's ruling, the U.S., quote, became the first country to pause its funding to UNRWA over the allegations. It was the first step by the Biden administration against UNRWA since renewing U.S. funding to the agency after the Trump administration completely cut it off. State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller said the U.S. is, quote, extremely troubled by the allegations, unquote, and the administration has, quote, temporarily paused additional funding for UNRWA while we review these allegations and the steps the United Nations is taking to address them, unquote. First off, the UN has already addressed the issue. They fired all of the employees that Israel accused of aiding the October 7th attacks, at least the ones that were still alive. What else is there to review? It'd be one thing if Israel provided evidence showing that half or even a quarter of these employees were Hamas affiliates, but that isn't the case at all. The State Department has provided no valid reason for cutting off funds to an organization that is currently aiding Gazan civilians who are facing relentless bombing of their land, of their homes. All we can do is speculate about why this is actually happening, since the State Department cannot provide any valid reasoning for cutting off all of these funds. My speculation, given the timing of these events, is that this is the State Department retaliating against the UN. And, more importantly, towards Palestinian civilians, because they're upset that Israel, their ally nation, just got called out by the International Court of Justice for engaging in potentially genocidal acts. And again, that wasn't even a definitive ruling. The ICJ only ruled that it is plausible that Israel is committing a genocide. I suspect that this is retaliation to the UN for its court's ruling against an allied nation, and until the State Department can provide valid reasoning for such an appalling move, that is what I'll continue to suspect. And of course, because the US is unwilling to engage in diplomatic solutions instead of selling weapons to a nation that is potentially committing a genocide, we find ourselves escalating our intervention in a regional war halfway across the globe. This is from AP News last Sunday. Quote, President Joe Biden said Sunday that the U.S., quote unquote, shall respond after 3 American troops were killed and dozens more were injured in an overnight drone strike in northeast Jordan near the Syrian border. Biden blamed Iran-backed militias for the first U.S. fatalities after months of strikes by such groups against American forces across the Middle East since the start of the Israel-Hamas war. So that's where we find ourselves, continuing to escalate conflict with other groups backed by a nuclear power. Yeah, absolutely nothing that could go wrong there. Nothing can go wrong like prodding a nation who also has nuclear weapons and is also allied with other nations, other enemy nations of the U.S. that are also nuclear armed. They have nuclear weapons. Considering the stakes then, I think it's important that I share some details about an upcoming action that you can participate in. The Tennessee Student Solidarity Network is organizing a sit-in at an undisclosed location this Saturday morning. And for security reasons, they are requiring anyone who is interested to DM them on Instagram for more info. So if you are interested, you would have to message the Tennessee Student Solidarity Network on Instagram to get info about that location. All the details can be found on their Instagram, of course. It is at TN Student Solidarity Network. Again, that account handle, I guess they call them handles on Instagram, but anyways, that account name is TN Student Solidarity Network. Again, you can find that on Instagram. So if you are looking to protest against, if you're looking to protest against the United States actions towards Israel and towards Gaza, which are directly leading us to intervene in a conflict with nuclear-armed powers, or at least a conflict that is backed by enemy nuclear-armed powers. That is a demonstration here in Tennessee that you can participate in. I would imagine it's probably going to be in Nashville. I think they say it's going to be in Nashville. No, they don't even provide that. I will say, just knowing people involved in the Tennessee Student Solidarity Network, that they are essentially based out of Nashville. So I would imagine that would be the general area where it's going to take place at. But again, if you want those details, you will. If you do want those details, you can find them if you decide to like DM their account. Hey, what's happening, friend? Big Dog Ethan here. Now I'm going to be performing an autopsy on the failed Democratic presidential primary campaigns, namely that or those of Dean Phillips and Marianne Williamson. So I commented last week on the results of the New Hampshire primaries. Just a review. On the Republican side of things, Trump won by like 10 points. And yeah, Nikki Haley, apparently she's still going to stay in the race, at least for the South Carolina primaries. Don't know why. I guess part of it has to do with some false hope that because she's from South Carolina, and I think either she is or was the governor of that state, so she may have some hopes there for winning that primary, but there is just no chance, just absolutely no chance whatsoever. All the polls are just kind of backing that up. On the Democratic side, though, we also had nothing surprising either, unfortunately. So the poll still had Biden up massively over Dean Phillips and Marianne Williamson in New Hampshire. And yeah, despite Phillips and Williamson's hard-hitting, on-the-ground canvassing efforts, they were not a match for Biden. Who, by the way, had to run as a write-in candidate because the DNC tried to force New Hampshire to wait before South Carolina held their primary elections. And yeah, it was a whole confusing mess, which I've already covered last week. But yeah, the results were devastating for progressive voters like me. So we had Joseph Biden at 63.9% as a write-in candidate. Wow. The power of incumbency is quite something to behold. Then right behind him, quote unquote, behind him was Dean Phillips at 19.6%. And then Marianne Williamson was all the way down there at 4.0%. If you decide to like calculate all of the combined write-ins, that was 8.3%. So she actually got less votes than people who were simply writing in candidates. So yeah, quite a depressing turnout for progressive voters. Look, I don't know who to blame here. I think part of me blames the entire progressive wing of the federal Democratic legislators. That blame is certainly held by the Squad, by Ro Khanna, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, all those progressive legislators who voiced no concern about Biden running for re-election. And some of them, including Khanna, Sanders, and even Barbara Lee, they all endorsed him. And yeah, they never even withdrew their endorsement for Biden after he started to blatantly share his lack of concern over the plausible genocide that is occurring in Gaza, which we are aiding and abetting. This is not what the progressive wing of the Democratic Party should have been doing. At the very least, they should have refrained from endorsing Biden and at least acknowledged that Biden had primary opponents. The only times that they would really acknowledge the existence of those opponents were if like they got onto a podcast and were deliberately asked about them. And when I say them, I can really only think of one, who is Ro Khanna. He was the one who was at least asked about that by the host of Breaking Points, and still he held firm, said no. He said he was going to keep endorsing Biden. So yeah, I think that was part of the blame, or where part of the blame lies, is just with the currently elected federal legislators. federally elected Democratic legislators specifically. I think part of the blame also rests with mainstream news media. Now, I'm not a crank, okay? I understand that Marianne and Dean, especially Dean, they both had a few interviews on mainstream national networks. Marianne had one appearance on Mehdi Hasan's show, now defunct unfortunately, on MSNBC, and she did have numerous appearances on Fox News, though I would argue that those weren't terribly effective, because really the only reason why Fox News was having her on was to get some bashing points on Biden out of her, essentially. There really wasn't much she could speak about in terms of her own platform and what she would do if she were elected. And regarding Dean Phillips, while CNN never had Marianne on, they did host a few interviews with Dean Phillips, but those, and really, I mean, all of these interviews with the two main primary opponents, they were just few and far between. And on top of that, there were also a lot of outlets like the LA Times and The Hill, to name a few, who blatantly ignored the fact that Biden had opponents running against him. I cannot tell you how many times I read articles from different news outlets, like print news outlets, where they simply said either Biden has no opponents running against him, or he has no serious opponents running against him. So I think part of the blame does rest with mainstream news media. But ultimately, I think at least half, if not most of the blame also lies with these candidates for different reasons. With Dean Phillips, the guy was just way too late to launch his campaign. He didn't launch until October 27th. And by that point, it was very clear that what a primary challenger to Biden needed to do was that they had to call for an unequivocal ceasefire in Gaza. And Phillips would only speak out of both sides of his mouth on the issue. To paraphrase his response on a Crystal Kyle and Friends interview, he'd say, "I do support a ceasefire, but Hamas has to return all of the Israeli hostages before we can even begin talking about a ceasefire." There is no modifier that he needed to add to that, or that he should have added to that if he really wanted to get, progressive support in the Democratic primary. He shouldn't have been adding that, because there is a 90% civilian death rate directly resulting from Israel's indiscriminate bombing of the Gaza Strip. And again, that indiscriminate part, that's not my word. That's from Biden. Phillips launched his campaign at a time where it was absolutely critical for him to champion a position that, according to polls from Data for Progress, is overwhelmingly supported by Democrats, independents, and even had 55% support among Republican voters. So he entered the race late, didn't adopt a policy position that the people of the U.S. overwhelmingly support. And in my personal opinion, man, he really dropped the ball as soon as he met with Bill Ackman and accepted a $1 million gift from him. That's according to a New York Times article on January 17th, by the way. I don't have that pulled up, but you can find a report about his meeting with Bill Ackman and the effects that had on his campaign policy, namely the removal of support for DEI. Now, for those who don't know, while Bill Ackman was not involved in the whole affair with the truck driving around Harvard's campus that was doxing students, again, that was Accuracy in Media's idea. Ackman did make a tweet on October 10th, 2023, requesting that Harvard release a public list of the students who signed on to the controversial letter so he could share it with his friendly CEOs and effectively blacklist them from ever getting a job. So, yeah, there are plenty of reasons why Dean Phillips failed to get the youth vote, and certainly the majority of votes within the Democratic primary for the presidential nomination. Now, there are also plenty of plenty of reasons to blame Marianne Williamson for the failure of her campaign too. Now, it's no secret that I was a Marianne supporter, and despite her loss, and despite everything else I'm going to say about her campaign here in a few minutes, I do want to make it clear that I don't feel any shame about supporting her candidacy. Sure, are there other left primary challengers that I would have supported over Marianne had they decided to hop into the race? Sure, absolutely. Williamson had plenty of character flaws, and those definitely surfaced throughout the course of her campaign. She had the shaky stances on vaccines. There was also the report about potential ill treatment of her campaign staffers. More on that in a second. And on top of that, her sometimes confusing rhetoric on the atrocities in Gaza kind of made her seem like at the very least, unaware about the full scale of what was going on in Gaza. And on top of that, she did have a lack of experience in elected office. All of these are valid concerns about her as a presidential candidate. Absolutely. Ultimately, there was just no other valid progressive option, with the slight exception of Dean Phillips, but still, whenever you're not calling for an unequivocal ceasefire in Gaza, at this point, it's just hard for me to vote for you. So, those are the reasons why her, I think those were sort of like her main shortcomings as a candidate. However, though, there was also a recent explosion of anonymous leaks from either current or former Marianne staffers through the Twitter account Organizer Memes, and some of these allegations would also show that there was probably some internal issues that was bringing this campaign down from the inside. Now, before I go through some of these accusations towards Marianne and the campaign as a whole, I need to make sure that it is abundantly clear that there is a huge, massive issue with this source. Namely, Organizer Memes' clear intent was to troll, not to provide accurate information. They were simply taking any anonymous claims and posting them. Now, some of them they were able to confirm with a second anonymous source, but for me, at least, I think that the major red flag with the Organizer Memes account was their claim that Marianne dropped out of the race when she actually didn't. They even tried to sneak into a volunteer call, like a call with all the volunteers on the campaign. And they recorded a video that they posted as evidence of Marianne dropping out. But if you watch the whole clip, which is about a minute long, you'll notice that she only says that she's just considering dropping out, which is very understandable considering she only got 4% of the votes in New Hampshire, where Biden was a write-in candidate. Williamson actually even had to end the call and make an emergency tweet clarifying that she wasn't dropping out, which I have to say, I think that is a huge mistake. There is no coming back from a massive loss like that in New Hampshire. The only chance that either Phillips or Williamson had for scoring the nomination was to win that state where Biden wasn't on the ballot. And both of them still, even in that scenario, they failed to do that miserably. In either case, though, despite some of the wild claims that this account was making, some of them verifiably false, there are still some doubly and anonymously sourced claims that are really, really, really bad if they are true. This is the most eye-opening one, and I will say this right now for those who are listening live. If you're watching the recording, the video recording version of this, you're already seeing it on screen, so my apologies. I didn't give this warning before, but some of the details here are a little bit graphic, unfortunately. Quote, there was a volunteer call in May that trolls got into and started screen sharing bestiality and violent porn. And Marianne wouldn't end the call, even after the campaign manager asked her to, because she wanted to talk to her fans, unquote. Now, there's a second tweet from another anonymous source, quote, can confirm. On the same call, some of the trolls started posting images of people dying or being killed. There were minors on the call. It dragged on for hours, unquote. So yeah, especially considering that there were minors on this call, that alone might find her in some legal trouble, potentially. There may be an argument that, she wasn't the one who was in charge of that content being posted in that call, but at the same time, she also wasn't ending it or really wasn't doing anything to prevent that kind of content from being shared in there. So that's certainly an issue. On top of that, though, here's another doubly and anonymously sourced claim. Quote, she spent campaign funds buying all of her staffers, like 30 of us, copies of 2 of her books. I don't remember how she billed it, but someone will. But anyway, here's what I did with mine, unquote. And there's a video of supposedly this person making the claim tossing the book into it looks like a trash compactor of some kind. It's like this massive metal container with like a giant claw arm sort of scooping all this trash. So anyways, the point is very clear. The person who made this claim also, tossed the books away in the trash. And there was a second source to confirm this. Quote, can confirm the books were billed as office supplies at Barnes and Nobles, unquote. Again, I'm sensing some legal troubles that will be appearing in the future for Marianne Williamson. And finally, this one. Now, they only had one source claiming this, so this one for sure is a questionable one. But another anonymous source claimed that, scrolling here to find it, here it is. Quote, some Marianne people working on campaign side were getting paychecks from a super PAC, unquote. Now, y'all, I do want to make this abundantly clear again. The intentions of this also anonymously run account is unknown. From what I gather, there seems to be a clear intent to troll the campaign and garner attention from all this controversy. So for the sake of fairness, I don't want to act like these reports are accurate in their entirety. And further, I don't even know how many of the anonymous accusations are coming from the same source. So, for instance, it could be that all of these accusations, which I would at least guesstimate would be like maybe, I don't know, 50 total different tweets accusing Marianne's campaign of different things. I have no idea if these are all just coming from like 4 or 5 campaign staffers, or if this is coming from like, a more diverse array of sources. So given all the unknowns with this, I'm personally taking these with a grain of salt unless, some more concrete direct evidence comes out from from either an account or a source that is purely trying to provide information and not, troll a campaign, right? All that said, though, if it is true that there was a wide array of different Marianne campaign staffers making these accusations, Williamson could find herself in a litany of serious legal trouble. Now, of course, I can already hear the vote blue no matter who crowd saying, please, you'd still vote for her over Biden? Really? Yes, absolutely I would. You want to know why? Because Marianne's campaign in and of itself wasn't taking any corporate PAC money, and Axios reported that Biden is just as, if not more, abusive to his White House staffers than Marianne is to her campaign staffers. I mean, this article right here, I mentioned it in one of my uploads to the kennel. It was the one just covering the primaries during the summer. And I even talked about it on one of my shows, my live broadcasted shows last semester. Here's a quote from the article. Quote, "The president's admonitions include, 'God damn it, how the fuck don't you know this? Don't fucking bullshit me,' and 'Get the fuck out of here,' according to current and former Biden aides who have witnessed and been on the receiving end of such accounts." I should note too, by the way, the different spin that Axios puts on this article, or on the accusations towards Biden. Whenever Politico put out their article talking about how Marianne's 2020 campaign staffers received some unfair and potentially abusive treatment, it was the general, "Oh, these poor campaign staffers, look at how they're being abused by this by their boss." Whereas with Axios, whenever they're reporting on Biden being abusive towards his White House staffers, they spin it as, "Oh, look at this guy. He's being a total badass." I mean, even look at if you look at the picture, that they have on the front of this article on Biden, it's like a picture of him wearing dark sunglasses with lava photoshopped into the lenses. I mean, it's all about making him look like some kind of tough badass who doesn't take shit from anyone. And it's just absolutely disgusting to see that kind of spin put on Biden, whereas a candidate who is actually challenging power, challenging the status quo, whenever mainstream news outlets like Politico are covering her, it's all about the, crocodile tears, caring about the poor campaign staffers, without considering, first off, the candidate that they're reporting on, and also how that candidate compares to her primary opponent, Biden, who, again, according to Axios, is just as, if not more, abusive towards his White House staffers. So, again, because Marianne wasn't taking any corporate PAC money, because she, at the very least, was not as abusive to her staffers as Biden is to his White House staffers, and because she's at least actively calling for a ceasefire, unlike Biden, who is just bending over backwards to Israel as they commit potentially genocidal acts, yes, absolutely, I would vote for Marianne Williamson. Oh, and I forgot one more key reason why I would vote for Marianne Williamson still, if she had at this point, truly, if she had a serious campaign, at the very least, she also has a list of policies that she would fight for if she were elected. Whereas Biden, and you can fact check this if you go on his campaign site, Biden2024.com, I think. In either case, it's still a simple Google search away. But if you go check out his campaign page, guess what you're going to find? No policy list at all. No policy platform. It's just a picture of him and Kamala standing in front of this cursive sign that says, "Let's finish the job." That is not going to be enough to convince voters to go vote for you. You have to have some kind of policy position, some kind of policy plan that's going to tell voters, "Hey, here's what I actually plan to do for your vote." He doesn't have any of that outlined. So for all of those reasons, yes, I absolutely would still vote for Marianne over Joe Biden, an absolute bought out corporate shill who is withering as we speak, and will be lucky if he makes it through the next 4 years in office. We'll be absolutely lucky if he doesn't have some kind of serious health condition that makes it nearly impossible for him to do his job. So, to summarize this kind of rambly segment, yes, I would have much preferred a different progressive candidate than Marianne Williamson that would challenge Joe Biden. But ultimately, Marianne's floundering campaign kind of represents how Biden has abandoned us progressives in this upcoming election. He, along with the DNC, is leaving us to little to no choice but to stay home on election day. And having a pretty weak progressive candidate like Marianne be the only one to actually champion important progressive issues at this time. Again, yes, Dean Phillips, there's a debate to be had there, but if he's not calling for an unequivocal ceasefire, I can't really consider him a true progressive at this point, whenever that is such an important issue for a lot of progressive voters right now. So yeah, with Biden leaving us a little to no choice, and with Marianne really being the only effective progressive candidate who is running in the race, yeah, I mean, it kind of shows just how that campaign represents how Biden is leaving us progressive voters in the dust and not really caring about what we want. And especially here in the state of Tennessee, whose Democratic Party didn't even put any of the primary opponents on the ballot, there's no way that progressives here in Tennessee are going to feel motivated to come out and vote for Biden. I mean, there's no policy plan, and currently he's aiding and abetting a genocide, which just about all progressive voters are against. And on top of that, it's kind of hard to justify to progressive voters to come out and vote for the guy who didn't really even have a fair primary election, whenever the Tennessee Democratic Party chose to not put any of the other primary candidates on the ballot. So, and I can tell you this too, I sure as hell am not going to be voting for Biden. I'll still vote in the state and local elections, sure. So I guess I'll be coming out to the polls, but I will not be coming out to the polls to vote for Biden. I will either be leaving that box blank, or I might write in some other candidate, but I will not be voting for Biden. He is soaked in the blood of Palestinians at this point, and he's also handcuffed by all of the corporate donors that support his campaign. There's simply no way I'm going to cast a vote for that decrepit corpse. If he really wanted me or any genuine progressive to vote for him, he would have ensured that his campaign and the DNC would have embraced democracy by actually acknowledging the merits of these primary candidates in public debates, rather than condescendingly ignoring them or virtually ignoring them, other than making the ridiculously false claims about, like, for example, Marianne being this crystal ball lady. That literally has nothing to do with Marianne's religious past. There's really nothing that she's ever said about any crystal balls. That just came from a off-the-hand remark that Karine Jean-Pierre made whenever a reporter asked her about Marianne's primary challenge. So, yeah, I mean, if he really wanted progressive voters to come out and vote for him, then he would have actually embraced democracy, but he didn't do that. Now, I should also note, too, by the way, it's not like Tennessee is even going to go to Biden. Tennessee is gerrymandered to the benefit of the Republican Party in the presidential elections. This isn't really a state that even has a chance of going blue for the presidential election. If this were a swing state, given the harsher Democratic threats that Trump poses, my vote for president might be different. There would certainly be different calculations I would be making, but I'm in Tennessee. And as long as that's true, and as long as Biden continues to offer nothing to excite progressives like me to come out and vote for him, he ain't getting my vote. No way in hell that's going to happen.